Hi, my name's Lily and welcome to Small Talk. So it's been a while, but I promise I'm back, and sorry for summer without Small Talk. How did you cope? Easily, I'm sure. Anyway, I took a little break because if you don't know, I'm from London, but I'm based in Barcelona, and I was documenting and experienced one of the strictest coronavirus lockdowns in the world. So yes, I did take a little break for myself this summer and ended up having a lovely time. I thought I wanted to reconnect and catch up just by first of all, talking a little bit about what's happened over the summer related to a few things in Europe especially, and then also talking about what we can expect next, coming this autumn, because there's loads of stuff going on and I'm going to be here to cover it all. So let's go a little bit back to where I left off, which was around July, and Spain had just announced that we had to wear masks and face coverings all the time, basically. So even whenever you step outside your house, in the street as well. Now, as I said, I documented the lockdown, but I also documented leaving lockdown, and I will link that video. I will link everything in the description box that I talk about today down below. Even though I am reflecting a lot on lockdown and thinking about the kind of personal effect it can have on people's mental health, on the way it kind of changes your perception of things, and also the way it's damaged the economy. I have been thinking and reflecting a lot about that this summer, but that aside, leaving lockdown was handled by the Spanish authorities, I think, very, very well. And I do talk about this in a video before. We had different phases of easing lockdown until we finally got into what's called the new normality. Now, I felt like the messaging was very, very clear throughout this, and also interestingly, it was asymmetrical across the country. So different areas and different regions had to meet certain criteria, like a threshold set by the federal health authorities and the federal government, before being able to enter the next phase of kind of easing of lockdown. I think that this was very effective. However, since then, things have gotten a little pear-shaped. I'm sure that you've seen the numbers rising in Spain, and kind of, looks like apocalypse and Armageddon is coming again. So I went to Greece in August. And I have to say that Greece has done very, very well with handling coronavirus. It was able to open up and welcome tourists. Interestingly, it didn't want the Brits for a lot longer than the rest of Europe and Southern Europe. It took longer to open up, and they have been monitoring things there. I had to say that coming from Spain to there, I had to have my QR code. I had to make sure everything was there to kind of even get on the flight. They were super, super strict. I had another friend who came from Brussels, and she actually had to produce a negative test before being able to be accepted in Greece, because by the time she came, the numbers had risen in Brussels, and it was the same with Spain. So I'll talk a little bit about how, the UK quarantine list, Greece didn't enter it until, well, it still hasn't entered it. A couple of islands have been added in the last few days, much to the disappointment of the Greek ministers. And the reason is the way that this quarantine list has worked is that a few things are monitored. First of all, it's cases increasing, which is why, Spain got added quite a long time ago, Croatia, cases increasing, but then also the apparatus and the capacity of countries to handle that. For example, cases are increasing in Italy, but because the Italian government has been really on top of its tracing, really on top of its testing, it means that really it hasn't entered the list. And actually Greece as well, the government is very proactive. So the British government, from what I understand, when it makes these quarantine new regulations, it takes into account how the other governments are managing the crisis there. And Greece has been very, very proactive. There was a curfew imposed for midnight in Athens in bars, and I think 2 a.m. in the islands whilst I was there. People are using face coverings on public transport and inside where you can't do social distancing. And also sort of bars are controlled. You can't sit at the bar. They've got parts of public transport is blocked off, so it controls the amount of people allowed on there. Buses are not getting too full, etc. Now, I'm going to make a big fuss of this because I think that when you have mechanisms and apparatus in like your ports of entry in the airports, and you're tracking and tracing the people who are within your country who did get infected, this is the way you get back to sort of a normal pace of life. Now, what the UK government is doing with its quarantine list is the exact opposite. It's a blanket restriction, which essentially means that they don't have the apparatus in their country. It's actually an indirect admission of sort of like negligence, or what I would see. If we're going to talk about Spain, I will contrast it to Italy. I really believe that in this case, Italy and Spain are really good examples to compare because they were hit very early on, like no other country. They didn't get the warning signals that some of their neighbours got. I think that when you want to compare coronavirus country by country, you need to compare people who had similar trajectories at the beginning and how they fared after that. For example, UK, France and Germany can be compared. Spain and Italy are also peers in that. Now, Italy was hit with, an absolutely terrible situation back in March, as we know. But it's also now come to be seen that actually it was more focused in one region, in Lombardy, and actually the south of the country was not as affected as it was seen. It was distorting all the figures because things were so bad in certain centres. Now, since then, Italy has really got on top of it. They were able to open to tourists. They have also got kind of serious test and tracing capacities. They also asked for, if you come from Greece to Italy, you have to get tested within 48 hours and isolate for those 48 hours until you get your result, positive or negative. Now, this is what you need. This is targeted. This is efficient. This is also having testing centres so people can go to them very easily. I mean, I've seen horror stories in the UK version of people typing in their local testing centre being based in South London, and they've been advised that they need to go to Fife. With Italy, I will emphasize again the tracing, the testing, and kind of being proactive. What happened in Spain is, this is the conversation. I'm not saying whether it's right or not or whether I agree with it. Like I said, there's no consensus. And in Spain, Spanish politics is difficult because there are lots of warring factions. And just because of the regional and central government dynamic, it is a little bit more complicated. And actually, I would say that kudos to the UK, because even though Scottish and Welsh and Northern Irish authorities have done things a little bit differently, they haven't attempted to undermine the English government, and there hasn't been a vice versa. There's no tit for tat, there's no pointing fingers. So hats off to that. So what happened here is that basically when we were under lockdown, that was under a state of alarm. So everything was controlled by the central government. Now, when we left lockdown, like I said, regions had to meet a threshold and then they were able to pass through the next phases. That also meant that the control for it was in the health ministries of each regions. This is the way it works here. Now, there are some arguments to say that some regional units failed and were too slow to act, did not have tracing working, and that this really has meant that instead of having a sort of nice controlled locating of virus hotspots, you've just kind of passed into community transmission here and they've lost control of the situation. That being said, returning back here, it isn't the apocalypse that I imagined. I think that there's really this whole drip feeding of figures and hospitalizations and cases and comparing to March all the time. And actually the situation on the ground, the city's moving, things are working. We are being told by ministers that it's not the same as March because apparently the figures that were reported then were a tip of an iceberg figure, whereas now the cases that we see recorded, the testing capacity means that they are actually the cases that we have. So it's not actually comparable, which I found interesting. So, turning my attention to the UK, what is happening in the UK? Well, I have consistently said, I have been consistently critical of the government's messaging around coronavirus and the pandemic. I think that even if you agree with some of the policies or disagree with some of the policies, it's very difficult to write policy in a pandemic. We're learning on our feet. Although we could look at East Asian countries who have been through this before and seem to have kind of handled it quite well, looking at South Korea. But instead, no, we go for this trial and error. What this has happened is, I think in the UK, unlike any other country in Europe, there has been a lot of confusion and not really much uptake of the government's advice each time it updates it. This was hugely undermined by obviously Dominic Cummings actually breaking lockdown rules. But I just think, in the UK, there's a big muddle, and that the easing of lockdown as well wasn't handled at all compared to here, where I felt that it was very, very well managed. So I want to talk about the quarantine list because, like I said, the quarantine list does the most damage. It's a sort of blanket measure that does so much damage, and it's not actually targeted to anything. It's relying on individual take-up of that regulation to sort of self-police and be like, I'll stay at home for 14 days. 14 days when it might not even be necessary is a huge ask. And why the hell is this only happening in the UK? I actually think that it is sort of evident of the fact that there is not apparatus. At this stage, there is still not testing capacity. Now, what's failed in Spain has been the tracing app. It's not the testing capacity. So how in the UK are we still not testing enough. So much so that now I saw the government has come on, Boris Johnson and the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, saying that the reason why they not got enough tests or something is that people who are asymptomatic are getting tested, and actually it should just be people with symptoms. That's terrible advice. The whole reason my friend had to get tested to come to Greece was because she is asymptomatic, so she doesn't know if she has coronavirus or not. It's supposed to be a requirement for you to go back to the workplace to know if you're going to infect the 400 people sharing your office building with, that's also political. We'll come to that. But I just think that when you have this sort of idea that it should only be those with symptoms should self-isolate. Those without symptoms, we should be able to be testing huge swathes of the population every day, because that's the only way we go back to normal. I don't understand. The economy is so critical at the moment, especially with Brexit coming. I just don't see the government's plan still. I feel like, as we know, it's been U-turn after U-turn after U-turn, and that's not the same in other countries. So talking about, government messaging, we also have it saying, back to work, and, that our city centres are suffering, our city centres are dying. I would refute that and say our city centres aren't dying, and it's actually Pret-a-Manger in London that's dying. I think that this is something that is a very London-specific issue, and some other cities in Europe, but let's talk about the UK. It's a London-specific issue. I don't know if regional cities are suffering their city centres as empty as London's, and that's because they're lived in. That's because there's local businesses there. That's because still local life happens in the city centre. What has happened to London is a symptom of the overall bad planning and the fact that the city was just handed over to commercial developers, and it's just been a workplace and tourism place for, my entire memory, and probably a long time before that. It's not the workforce's issue to go back to work when it's possibly not safe, and people have huge commuter distances. Apparently people have been logging on more than they do at work anyway. So I feel like this is actually something that needs to be addressed, and actually urban spaces should be reclaimed, or wherever that would be. That's an interesting point. But I also see it here in Barcelona. Barcelona has relied so much on tourism that it has gutted the city centre now. But the other sort of satellite towns and the other districts of the city are doing fine. They're full of life. They're vibrant. People are on the terraces and they're living normally, because this is where normal people live. And that's maybe what we're showing, that city centres still need normal people to function. The final thing that I want to say about the UK is that I've seen a kind of slow turning tide of support against Boris Johnson and the government. Now, I say Boris Johnson and the government because actually the Tory party have also been critical of the government. I've seen Tory MPs briefing the press, briefing the BBC, talking about how these U-turns are damaging trust, how we need to get some sort of plan and hold on to the dynamic and the narrative again. I've also seen in the right-wing press, the Daily Mail has had more than one bad headline, I think, called Gavin Williamson, the Education Secretary, and Boris Johnson dunces, because where was Boris Johnson throughout all of that fiasco? The exams fiasco was horrifying. It was so disruptive, and it had something like 70% support from the public. And where was he? He was found hiding in a teepee in Scotland, found by the Daily Mail, in fact. I've also seen Times critical pieces. I've also seen The Spectator doing editorials against the government. So I don't think that this is an issue for the Tories to stay in power, because the Tories are the party of government, and the way they get to do it most of the time is decapitating their own leader. So I do believe that the Tory party will be fine and will stay in power, but I do have a little prediction for you, which is that Boris Johnson will possibly go before his term is done, and sooner than we think, because actually, as he has burnt so much political capital this year, he's supposed to be riding the Brexit wave. He has unheard of opinion polls, in his favour going into power, and he's just burnt through it. A lot of it to save his special advisor Dominic Cummings, but all sorts of things have gone on, and I think that he may not survive, but the Tory party will stay in power. Finally, let's have a look at things that we've got this autumn. We have the big one. It's Brexit. It's finally happening. By the 1st of January, we will be completely separated from the EU. Now, there are a few things to look at. I think the UK is about to, or has already, broken international law, because I think we're tearing up that withdrawal agreement that we signed. I have a link of that. We are also probably going to head for no deal, and we're still talking about the Irish backstop and Northern Ireland. So it's the same conversations. I will talk a little bit about it because things are crazy. Now, linked to that, but another huge deal is that we have the US election. It's going to be in about 50 days, and that actually affects the UK too. So to think of it from a UK perspective, the trajectory of Brexit very much hangs on this. If Trump manages to secure a second term, the UK will have its trade deal, maybe not all the things that we wanted, but it will be fine. And it has attached to a bigger bully, and can deal with what it sees as its European bullies at the moment, because UK diplomacy seems to be based on being bullied at the moment. So other than that, it's also interesting because if it was to switch to Biden, then actually the UK, as Obama said, by leaving the EU would go to the back of the queue when it comes to a trade deal. And this has now been backed up yesterday by Nancy Pelosi. I mean, yesterday, I don't know when you'll see this, so a few days ago, by Nancy Pelosi, who's the lead Democrat in Congress. She's the speaker. And she said that there will be no trade deal if the UK backtracks on its commitment to the Good Friday Agreement, and that they're watching what's happening very carefully with Northern Ireland, and that they're invested in this. So, yeah, I don't know. Boris Johnson's government just keeps giving itself headache after headache. And also, Boris Johnson came as one of the last populists to enter government. The UK is late to all of this, but his cronies, his natural allies, are going away. I mean, if Donald Trump loses in November, he would be the last, I think someone called it like tantrum politics, the last one standing, bashing the fist on the table, not offering much substance, but just sort of carrying an emotional dream for people. So these are things to look out for. The last one is going to be coronavirus. Obviously, how do people transition back? Are we going to go back to lockdowns? The race to the vaccine. Are the Russians going to produce one first? It's like the race to space, race to the vaccine now. And also the UK, test and trace app, is it actually going to turn up? Is this ever going to happen? Because I just think it's absolutely shocking that we still don't have a testing system in place. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you on the next one. Of course, if you like this, please give me a like. It really helps. And subscribe if you're interested. Thanks. Bye.